All right, golfers, I want to go through the different scenarios in which a player would swing too far from the inside and just give you guys some deeper understandings into how to start correcting it. Because in my opinion, there's a lot of videos you're going to see on the internet where it's like, do this and you'll guaranteed not swing too far from the inside. But it's not just a question of our club path that we want to change. We want to make sure that everything else is becoming efficient as well, which means that our strike location is in the right spot, which also means that our attack angle is going to be in the right spot, right? We don't want to just swing more or less from the inside. Any change we make is going to affect other variables, one of which is the attack angle. There's a big difference of me swinging too far from the inside with my low point behind the ball versus me swinging too far from the inside with my low point way out in front of it. And those are going to be affected very differently, okay? So what does that mean? Well, if my path is, as a right-handed golfer, way too far to the right, but my low point is really far behind the ball. I'm not somebody who takes a lot of divots. I'm somebody who kind of picks the ball clean. I tend to thin the ball a lot. Usually that implies that my swing direction is also too far to the right. Swing direction and club path are not the same. Swing direction is affected by the path, but also by the attack angle. So what is likely happening in that situation? Well, what would move my club path more to the right, but also move my low point behind the ball? Well, any sort of shallowing of the club where the club is dropping more behind my body usually will cause this club to move the path that way. But because I'm lowering this club into the ground, the low point is going to occur behind the golf ball in many situations, especially if my body's not doing something to correct it. So if I'm independently shallowing the club a lot more, I'm going to shallow the attack angle while also moving path more from the inside. Well, there's another situation in which you're going to do that, which would be the amount of side bend we add in the downswing. So if I leave everything alone, meaning my lower body here is going to be left kind of still, and all I do is I add trail side bend, right, this way into my downswing. So for me as a right-handed golfer, I'm swinging that way. Well, what does that do? Well, if I add trail side bend, I lower the hands and lower the club, and I'm having a very similar effect to the first scenario I spoke about, which is where the club head gets lower to the ground. My attack angle is shallowing out because my low point's moving back, and my path is moving to the right. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean the low point's going to get behind the ball. It just means that it's going to move it further back relative to where it was. So any sort of trail side bend adding, if I'm doing it in isolation, we're not talking about other variables, or I'm just lowering the hands and arms, right, and the arm structure is dropping, that's going to shallow the attack angle and move the path to the right. So these are things that are going to affect them in that way. Well, that's a big difference versus if I stand here and I add a big lateral shift towards the target in my downswing. Because what does that do? Well, rotation, we know, brings this club back in front of us. The lateral movement does not. The lateral movement is going to continue to keep it kind of on its plane and dropping it more inside. The difference is because my body is getting out in front of the ball when I add a lateral component, right? Well, if I swing more laterally in my downswing, as I shift my body laterally, I might still be adding some side bend. Keep that in mind. Obviously, nothing really happens in isolation, but let's focus on just the lateral component for now. As I shift laterally, I'm moving my low point in front of the golf ball, right? I'm now going to create a divot that's going to be in front of the ball. I'm going to steepen my attack angle. The difference is if I don't do anything else and I just shift laterally and I'm not also rotating at the same time, I'm still going to keep this club head to the inside, meaning my path is going to get actually more to the right. So if I add a lateral component to my golf swing, right, from here, and then I come down and hit this ball, I'm adding more shaft lean and I'm steepening my attack angle, which is actually going to still move my path to the right. The difference is that is shifting my path while steepening the attack angle, right? Versus the golfer who's adding side bend this way too much, which is actually going to shallow my path and my attack angle. So being created very differently, which is no different than if we shift the ball position, right? If I stand here and I'm going to play around with my ball position, if I move my ball position more back in my stance, because of the natural way that the arc works in the golf swing, the further back in my stance I put this golf ball and I make the same swing, well, I'm going to catch the ball more from the inside part of the arc, right? But because my ball position is moving back, I'm also going to hit down on it more. So if I just move my ball position back in my stance, I will still move my path more from the inside. Sometimes this causes golfers to swing too far from the inside just because the ball position is too far back in their stance, but it steepens the attack angle. Whereas if I keep the ball position in the center and then I add side bend this way into the downswing, I'm still going to move my path to the right, but I'm going to shallow the attack angle. So What I want you guys to be aware of going forward, and this is just like one small scenario, we can dive into a million of them, but the idea being that not everything is created equally. It's really easy to latch onto a club path number, let's say that type of metric when you're looking at a TrackMan, right? Any sort of launch monitor really. But ClubPath never really tells the whole story, just like the face angle doesn't tell the whole story, just like anything. You can't only rely on launch monitor data. So it's not as simple as like, hey, the path is too far this way or this way, we need to change it. Well, what is everything else doing? Because if my path is too far right for me, but my attack angle is too steep, that is going to require a very different type of adjustment versus if my attack angle is too shallow with my path too far to the right, right? And those kind of tell me a little bit more about the story. Now I know that I might be adding too much trail side bend, or my arm plane might be too deep, or the club might be shallowing too much, versus a golfer whose path is too far right, but they have way too much lateral in the downswing, or their ball position is too far back in their stance and they're hitting down on it too much. Those are going to create very different ball flights, despite the fact that the curves might be similar or the club paths might be similar. So just something to open up everybody's ideas when we're looking at the golf swing. I'm going to start doing bigger deep dives onto this type of information because I think this part's so important for us to start learning how to assess our ball flight issues, right? If we actually want to create better ball flight, that also implies the spin rates, the strike location, everything, our turf interaction with the ground. If we want to really improve these things, we can't just rely on simple data points like path too far in, too far out. Let's look at the bigger picture and correct it the right way.